The family meeting felt routine at first. Tea on the table. Polite concern in my parents' voices. Then my father said it, looking straight at me. You need to accept it. You're the poor one now. My mother didn't argue. My siblings stayed quiet. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I just sat there while they decided who I was. That's when the sound started outside. Low. Heavy. Getting closer. My father stopped mid-sentence and went pale as he looked out the window. Because whatever was landing behind the house wasn't an accident. And it wasn't there for them. The meeting was framed as concern. My parents asked me to come over on a Sunday afternoon. My father said it was nothing serious. Just a conversation about plans and stability. That word again. Stability. It was always code for comparison. We sat around the dining table. Tea was poured. Biscuits untouched. Everything felt rehearsed in a way I couldn't explain at the time. My father started by asking how work was going. I gave him a vague answer. I'd learned that specifics only invited judgment. He pressed anyway. Asked about income. About timelines. About whether I had considered something more reliable. I told him I was fine. He shook his head slightly like I was missing the point. Then he said it. You need to be realistic, he told me. Compared to your siblings, you're struggling. You're basically the poor one now. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sound angry. That almost made it worse. My mother nodded. Not aggressively. Just calmly. Like this was a conclusion they had already reached together. My siblings didn't say much. One of them avoided eye contact. The other looked uncomfortable but didn't step in. I felt heat rise in my face, but I stayed quiet. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew anything I said would sound like an excuse to them. I tried once. I mentioned that I was working on something long-term. That progress didn't always look loud. My father waved it off. People say that when they don't want to admit they're stuck, he replied. That's when I stopped talking. What they didn't know was that the last year of my life had been a series of careful decisions. I had stepped away from a comfortable role to partner with a small infrastructure firm, expanding into regional logistics. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with social proof. But it was real. I hadn't told my family because I'd learned a hard lesson earlier in life. If you talk before something is solid, people judge the idea instead of waiting for the result. So I let them believe what they wanted. The meeting continued without me. Advice disguised as concern. Comparisons disguised as motivation. I nodded when expected. Then the sound began. First I thought it was distant traffic. A low hum barely noticeable. But it didn't fade. It grew heavier. Closer. Vibrating through the windows. My father paused mid-sentence. What's that? He asked. No one answered. The sound deepened, unmistakable now. My phone buzzed on the table. A single message lit up the screen. Landing in 3 minutes. I didn't touch it. Because at that moment I knew this conversation was about to stop being about who they thought I was. And start being about how wrong they had been. The sound didn't stop. It circled. Lowered. Pressed against the air until the windows hummed faintly. The teacups rattled just enough for everyone to notice. My father stood up and walked toward the window like he needed proof of what his ears were already telling him. My mother followed slower. My siblings stayed seated, frozen between curiosity and embarrassment. I stayed where I was. That can't be for here, my father said, mostly to himself. I didn't correct him. Outside, the helicopter dipped lower, angling toward the open field behind the house. The field everyone ignored. The one no one thought about until now. Dust lifted. Grass bent flat. My father's phone rang. He answered it quickly, his voice already different. Straighter. More alert. Yes. I see it now, he said. Pause. No, I wasn't aware of the timing. He hung up and looked at me. They're doing a land assessment, he said. Council-backed. For a logistics expansion. I nodded once. My sister frowned. How do you know that? I'm coordinating it, I said. The room went quiet in a new way. Not shocked. Not angry. Just unsettled. The helicopter settled into the field. Doors opened. People stepped out. Helmets. Clipboards. High-visibility vests. Not flashy. Professional. One of them pointed toward the house. Another checked a tablet. Then one of the men looked up, saw me through the window, and raised a hand in greeting. Casual. Familiar. My father didn't sit back down. "Why would they know you?" he asked. I took a breath. Because this was the moment I'd avoided for months. "I'm their local partner," I said. "This site has been under review for a while." My mother blinked. "Partner how?" I explained carefully. Not defensively. Not proudly. I told them I'd left my previous role to work with the regional firm expanding supply routes. That my job was coordination, permits, site access, and long-term planning. That the field behind their house was one of several locations being evaluated. My father stared at me, trying to line this up with the version of me he'd already decided on. "You never mentioned any of this," he said. "I didn't want to," I replied. "Not until it was real." One of the engineers knocked on the door a few minutes later. Asked politely if they could step inside briefly to review boundary documents. My father stepped aside automatically. Inside, the team greeted me by name, thanked me for the preparation, asked if I'd sent the updated access notes. I answered calmly, like this was normal, because it was. My parents watched without interrupting. When the team left, the house felt smaller. My father finally sat down. "So," he said slowly, "this has been going on for how long?" "Just over a year." My sister crossed her arms. "And you let us think you were struggling?" I met her eyes. "I didn't correct you." That landed harder than anything else I could have said. My mother spoke quietly. "We were worried." "I know," I said. "But worrying doesn't give anyone the right to decide who I am." No one argued. That night ended early. Awkward goodbyes. No resolution. No apology. As I drove home, my phone buzzed again. A message from my father. "We need to talk again. Just us." I stared at it for a long moment. Because now that the assumption was cracked, the real questions were coming. And I wasn't sure they were ready for the answers. I met my father alone 2 days later. He chose a cafe near his office. Neutral. Public. A place where conversations stayed measured. That already told me he wasn't coming to apologize. He was coming to understand. He arrived early. I could tell because his coffee was already half gone when I walked in. We didn't talk about the helicopter right away. He asked how long I'd been working with the firm. I told him again. Just over a year. He asked why I'd left my old job. I explained the opportunity, the risk, the reason it made sense to me, even when it didn't look impressive on paper. He listened quietly. That was new. Then he leaned back and said something that surprised me. "We thought you were drifting." Not failing. Drifting. He explained that from their perspective, I'd stepped off the expected path. No promotions to brag about. No visible milestones. No lifestyle upgrades. Just silence. "And silence makes people assume the worst," he said. I didn't disagree. I told him what silence had been for me. Focus. Caution. Learning. I told him how many nights I'd spent worrying about decisions I couldn't undo. How often I'd almost quit. How I'd kept going because the plan made sense even when it looked small. He nodded slowly. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Why didn't you trust us enough to tell us?" I thought about it before answering. "Because every time I've shared something unfinished," I said, "it's been judged like a final result." He didn't argue. Instead, he looked tired. "I didn't realize we were doing that," he said. That hurt more than if he had denied it. We talked for almost an hour. About expectations. About comparison. About how easily concern turns into control when parents don't know how to step back. He didn't ask me to come back to the family routine. Not yet. But word travels faster than conversations. Within days, my siblings started acting differently. More curious. Less dismissive. One of them asked about the project casually, like they hadn't already decided I was failing. My sister, though, stayed distant. She didn't call. She didn't text. She watched from the sidelines. Eventually, she invited me to lunch. She didn't apologize either. She told me she felt blindsided, embarrassed, that she hated being the last one to know. I wasn't trying to put you down, she said. I just didn't think you were doing this. I asked her what this meant. She hesitated. Something that mattered. That stung. I told her calmly that I'd been doing things that mattered for a long time, just not things that showed well in conversation. She nodded but didn't fully accept it. I guess I didn't see you that way, she admitted. That sentence settled something inside me. It wasn't anger anymore. It was understanding. They hadn't doubted me because of evidence. They doubted me because of narrative. And once a family agrees on a story about you, it takes more than words to change it. The project moved forward quietly. Permits approved. Contracts signed. No headlines. No celebration. But the tone at home shifted. Advice turned into questions. Comparisons stopped. The word poor was never used again. Still, something remained unresolved. I was being treated with more respect now. More caution. But not more trust. And I realized something unsettling. They respected the outcome, not the process. They valued me now because something visible had landed behind their house, which made me wonder what would happen if things ever went quiet again. That thought stayed with me longer than the helicopter noise ever had, because I hadn't decided yet whether this change was enough, and whether I wanted to keep explaining myself to people who only listened after proof arrived. The next family gathering happened 3 months later. No one officially invited me. My mother just texted, "If you're free, we're all having dinner Sunday." No pressure. No expectations. I almost didn't go. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't sure who they expected to show up. The version of me they dismissed, or the version they were suddenly careful around. I went anyway. The house looked the same, but the energy didn't. Conversations paused when I entered, then restarted politely. Not awkward, just cautious. My father asked about work. Not in the old interrogating way. More like someone afraid of saying the wrong thing. My sister asked a few surface-level questions and nodded along. She didn't interrupt. That alone felt strange. No one mentioned the helicopter. That silence told me more than any apology could have. At one point my mother said quietly, "We're proud of you." It sounded sincere. But it came late. I realized then that their pride wasn't rooted in how I'd grown, struggled, or stayed steady when nothing showed. It was rooted in what they could now point to. Something visible. Something undeniable. Later that night, my father pulled me aside. He told me he'd been thinking about that meeting. About what he'd said. About how he'd framed concern as truth. "I shouldn't have compared you," he admitted. That wasn't fair. It was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get. I thanked him. And I meant it. But something had already shifted inside me. Because while they were adjusting their behavior, I had adjusted my boundaries. I didn't start coming around every weekend again. I didn't take on old roles. I didn't explain my decisions unless I wanted to. And for the first time, no one pushed back. Weeks passed. Life settled. The project behind their house moved forward smoothly. Construction schedules. New teams. More activity. It became background noise like everything else. And slowly the novelty wore off. That's when the real test came. One evening my sister made a comment about how lucky I'd been. How timing had worked out for me. How things just lined up. She didn't mean it cruelly. But she meant it. I looked at her and realized something important. Even now, after proof, after visibility, after respect, they still needed my success to feel accidental. Because if it wasn't luck, then they had been wrong. I didn't correct her. I didn't argue. I just smiled and let it pass. That was my closure. Not because they fully understood me, but because I no longer needed them to. The helicopter didn't change who I was. It didn't make me worthy. It just interrupted a story they'd grown comfortable telling about me. And once that story cracked, I stopped trying to replace it with a better one. I let my life speak quietly, consistently. on its own timeline. Now, when I visit, I'm treated with respect. But it's conditional. It exists as long as results remain visible. And that's fine. Because I've learned the difference between being supported and being tolerated. Between being loved and being validated. I don't chase either anymore. The real shift wasn't in how they saw me. It was in how little I needed to prove anything at all. That family meeting taught me something I didn't expect. Sometimes people don't underestimate you because you lack potential. They underestimate you because they need you to stay small to protect their own certainty. And sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't showing up loudly. It's building quietly, then choosing how much access anyone gets once they finally notice. That's the part no one talks about. And that's where this story actually ends.